few weeks ago, I released a video showing the installation and the use of SteamOS on this home theatre PC using Bazzite, and a few people noticed that the sort of numbers, the performance frames per second I were getting in some games was way higher than what I was getting in Windows. So let's dive into that. So this is something that a couple of people had commented about specifically. It seemed like in Doom Eternal, the frames per second were much higher under Bazzite/SteamOS than they were under Windows on that particular PC. And I'd noticed this when I was doing the editing and setting the video up. I didn't really want to draw much attention to it because I wasn't actually sure that those numbers were correct. I wasn't sure that the game settings were the same under Windows and SteamOS. I thought they were, but I wasn't sure. And it was only one game. I wasn't sure if there was anything else going on. The purposes of those two separate videos weren't to kind of compare each other. There wasn't Windows versus SteamOS. That's what this video is about. But so there wasn't really a fair comparison there. And I kind of thought, oh yeah, this would be a good video. We'll do this in the future sometime. However, my home theatre PC is actually going to be going to someone. I've been auctioning it off on eBay to raise more money to do more videos, as it's just not a computer that I actually need around. And actually, when I release this video, it'll already be at its new home, hopefully. So I was kind of running out of time, and I thought, that's fine. I will have some hardware in the future that I could do this test on. But then, of course, the idea kept bugging at me. I really wanted to know, was there such a big difference? Was this really something that maybe we're sleeping on? That actually SteamOS is the ultimate operating system if you want a PC that's just for gaming. Yeah, I couldn't let it rest. I tried to put it to bed. So instead, with what little time I had, I quickly roped together some comparisons, and yeah, that's where we are today. So essentially, I've picked 6 different games that we're going to use to benchmark. These are kind of testing the breadth of the capabilities of this console. Some games are lower end, therefore we would expect quite high frame rates, and then some are really going to test it to even get like 30 FPS. So we're going to be trying out Half-Life 2, Black Mesa, Doom Eternal, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, Metro Exodus, and Cyberpunk. And we're going to use these games to benchmark under Windows and benchmark under SteamOS. We'll be gaming at Full HD on both, and we will be using both the same in-game settings across both operating systems. So the only thing that should change is the operating system. And let's dive in. Let's see, is it correct? Is SteamOS something we've all been sleeping on and we should all be installing right away? Let's take a look. So just want to mention, for those that are new to the channel, haven't seen the previous videos, the hardware that we're dealing with here is a Intel i7 6700 6th gen i7 processor, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, and an AMD Radeon RX 6400 with 4 gigabytes of graphics memory. So not a super powerful system, but as we've seen through the previous videos, very, very good at HD gaming. So first things first, we are starting off with Half-Life 2 with all the highest settings, obviously disabled VSync. Like I said, we'll be running at 1080p on everything. And here we have, as you can imagine, an awful lot of frames. Consistently over 200 FPS in Windows, and the same in Bazzite as well. There isn't a huge difference here. The one thing I will note is that some frames seem to spike much more in Windows. It seems we kind of have an inconsistency with the frame rate, whereas it's a lot smoother in Bazzite. It really actually is very smooth in Bazzite. So there's definitely a smoothness improvement here, even if there isn't more FPS. Next up, we have Black Mesa. Again, maximum settings across the board, ready to go. And what we find under Windows, again, is completely playable. We're still getting an awful lot of frames. Highness sits around 130, 150, peaking up a little bit when it's in smaller areas and dropping quite far down to about 60 FPS in particularly hard areas, but overall very smooth. Under Bazzite, this is a bit of an oddity. we seem to be having some sort of frame capping at about 60 FPS. Now, as we saw in Half-Life 2, at the system level, it's definitely not capping the FPS, and as far as I could tell, everything was like VSync and everything else was disabled in the game settings, but we were still very much getting this kind of 60 FPS hard limit, which is odd. I will also say there's quite a lot of lighting glitches running this. I get the same on the Steam Deck. I think it's kind of a SteamOS issue with this game, unfortunately. That kind of hard capping at 60 FPS, slightly odd. If anyone knows why, comment down below. So if we more directly compare the two together, we can definitely see that we are getting more frames in Windows, are also experiencing spikes in individual frame processing times on both platforms. So perhaps Windows is winning out here a little bit, I would say, in this regard, especially as for some reason we have this 60 FPS cap. Not really sure what's going on there. And then, like I said, when we go into areas that are a bit more complex, there's lots going on in the scene, and there's kind of a wider open world, lots being rendered. We can see that on Windows we do drop down quite a lot and get back down near that 60 FPS. Whereas on Bazzite, it's kind of almost consistently, solidly 60 FPS. So again, some sort of capping going on here. Really don't know what's going on. And when we compare it more directly, you can really see the lighting glitches on Bazzite as well. Doesn't seem to be getting the lighting quite right, applying those textures, and things are brighter where they shouldn't be. And yeah, there's something going on here. Unfortunately, definitely Windows wins in this regard. Future Zachary here, just stopping in to say we are still an incredibly small channel, and about 95% of you are not subscribed. So if you're watching this video and you are enjoying it, please do hit that subscribe button. It would help me out immensely. Thank you very much, and on with the video. Next up, we are into Doom Eternal, one of the games that people noticed a big difference in. Here we're running at medium settings, which really is kind of the limit with the amount of VRAM that we have available. Again, this graphics card, unfortunately, only 4 gig. Under Windows, however, it's a solid experience. Kind of, I would say, peaking at around 80 FPS, dropping down into the 60s. And the same can kind of be said on Bazzite. I will say we are getting some higher peaks there. I would say it's more consistently in the 70 to 80 range. We definitely get some improvements in this game from playing under Bazzite compared to Windows. And I think this is a big example where the resource constraints are so tight that any extra resources that we have by running a low resource operating system really helps games like Doom. You can see that I think on average we are hitting around 10 FPS more under Bazzite than we are on Windows. It's not the crazy numbers that we saw in the previous videos, but there is a big improvement. It's noticeable, definitely. You're sticking above that kind of 70, 80 FPS a lot more. Doesn't feel like it's slowing down as much. So yeah, there's definitely a win here for Bazzite. And then looking at Jedi Fallen Order, we can see that under Epic settings, I've turned the max frame rate up to 144. We're not going to get anywhere near that. Playing the game, you're getting under Windows, dips to around 40, peaks of around 70, but the frame rate is pretty inconsistent. There is definitely kind of stutters and points where it's trying to keep up, but it's taking a lot longer to process certain frames. Under Bazzite, I would say things are much smoother. There isn't much of a frames per second performance gain, but the frames are way, way smoother. And we can compare this directly when we're looking at kind of some of the rendered cinematic cutscenes. You can see that the frame graph for Bazzite is way smoother than the frame graph for Windows. Not much difference in the FPS. Arguably, actually, Windows is kind of trying to pump out a few more frames, but it's doing it so inconsistently that actually it feels much nicer under SteamOS / Bazzite. So I definitely say that in terms of a playability point of view, this game plays better under Bazzite. Obviously, we could fix some of these issues by lowering the settings, but at these settings, at the maximum settings, it is better under SteamOS. It is more playable, it is more smooth, even if you are getting a few less frames. And then looking at Metro Exodus, so we are set quality to Ultra, and again, still running at 1080p. It's a smooth experience on Windows, so we're getting kind of sitting around 70 FPS, peaks of up to 80, dips down to about 50, I would say, in more busy gameplay areas. The opening sort of rendered cutscene shows it's a pretty smooth graph. It's not too bad of experience at all. You're definitely not getting some of those kind of big hitches that we've seen in some games under Windows. So I would say it's handling this a lot better than the likes of Jedi Fallen Order. Under Bazzite, it's much of the same. It's much of the same. We have no real difference in FPS, perhaps a little bit less, but it's still very consistent, still quite a smooth graph. If we start kind of comparing gameplay side by side, yeah, I would say we're getting a few less frames under Bazzite, but from a smoothness perspective, it's pretty good going. It's also seems to be capping itself again at about 60 FPS. I don't know what's going on here. VSync is disabled, but Bazzite is actually capping itself. And that's a bit annoying because it's not really putting it full to the test. You can see it's not, I don't know, something's going on here. It's very strange, but it's completely playable on both platforms and definitely very smooth. And then finally, we have the big hitter, Cyberpunk. So we're disabling things like scaling, resolution scaling, frame generation. We are also turning off ray tracing, but setting everything else to essentially the high setting, which puts some stuff to ultra. And under Windows, it struggles. Now, this is really making the system sweat. We are really struggling to get above that kind of 20 FPS. It does not feel fun to play. It is jittery, it is slow, and you can kind of see the system is really struggling as well. The GPU is absolutely being hammered. It's reporting at some points it's using over 100%, which is kind of concerning, as well as using every last megabyte of VRAM that we have. So yeah, Windows does not like running at ultra, surprisingly enough, on Cyberpunk on this system. Switching over to Bazzite, however, it's a bit of a different story, and this is fascinating. We are getting a solid 30 FPS on these settings, which is incredibly impressive. I would say this is actually quite playable. I'd probably dial down the settings a little bit, let's be honest, but we've got a massive performance gain here. And again, I think this is exactly the same thing as we saw in Doom, where because the game is so demanding, every last little bit of performance we can eke out from the system not being used by the operating system is going to help us here. So really is a case of if you want to run some really demanding games or games at higher spec than really you should with this kind of system, having a operating system like Bazzite / SteamOS is really going to help. Very interesting. Love to see the difference here in Cyberpunk. Well, there we go. Some interesting results there. I mean, it's kind of what I actually expected. I've got no idea what was going on with the original differences, but in this comparison, things make a lot more sense. SteamOS is a more performant operating system if you've got restricted resources, because it's a smaller operating system. Just the same as if you'd installed really any Linux distribution and then installed Steam. I wouldn't necessarily say there's a big bonus to specifically using Bazzite / SteamOS for this purpose, other than, of course, you get all the goodness that comes with it and the nice built-in, straight into SteamOS kind of UI and everything else. Like, it works very well as a home theater PC / console replacement kind of job. But I think the performance improvements we're getting here are pretty much just down to the fact that the system is using less resources just to run the operating system. Windows 11 is quite a heavy system, and on some of this aging hardware, that's definitely going to be a problem. So yeah, I'm not surprised by this. There wasn't any huge surprises. It's nice to see that there is a performance boost. And I would say if you're looking to build a PC that is specifically for gaming, and you really want it to be controller first, and you don't play the kind of games that don't work under Linux, check it out, because you're going to get a little bit more performance, and who doesn't like free extra performance? So yeah, I enjoyed looking into this, and it kind of scratched that itch that was stuck in the back of my head. And I'm glad I've been able to do it before this computer heads off to its new home. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I know I've enjoyed putting it together, and I will see you again very, very soon for another one. Bye. Bye for now.